Hello, and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and in life and simplify them. And friends, today I want to talk about a touchy subject. Okay, it doesn't have to be touchy, but let's face it, sometimes, most times when I'm talking to somebody I totally disagree with, it's so hard. So how do we have those critical conversations both at work, at home, with our buddies, with our partners, with our coworkers, with our boss, gosh, anybody that you come in contact with that you might actually disagree with, but you want to do it well. You want to be respectful in how you disagree. So my special guest today, I'm so excited for you guys to meet him. His name is Justin Jones-Fosu. He's the driving force and CEO behind Work Meaningful, which delivers powerful talks to organizations to help them transform corporate culture, improve inclusion and employee experience, and help teams do more meaningful work so that they can ascend to their peak potential through mastery of mindset, purpose, and performance. He's also the author of a few books, Your Why Matters Now, The Inclusive Mindset, and we're going to talk about his latest book, I Respectfully Disagree, How to Have Difficult Conversations in a Divided World. So I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Justin Jones-Fosu. Hey, Justin.
Yes, great job. Great job with the introduction. I'm excited to be here, and you have simplified my introduction, so thank you.
There you go. You can take it. So I just really love, I've learned about your work and seen some of your talks online, and fantastic work, truly. And you know, it takes a certain personality to get into the workplace, to get into corporate America and help people kind of see their blind spots. And I feel like communications now more than ever, I feel is so charged, so electric that the concept of civil discourse, if you will, at work, it's just such a hot topic in the US right now, especially given that it's a presidential election year here in the States. But you and I talked earlier, and you aren't a fan of the term civil discourse. Why is that? And what could be a better way to frame things?
Yeah, so I mean, how people mean what they mean when they talk about civil discourse is often on target with what I'm saying, right? Because I know a lot of people use the term civil, and so I'm not against the word, but how it's normally being used and reflected is just be nice and polite. It's almost that aspect of a lot of organizations back in the day try to control what people talked about. So they told people, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion. You have to be civil. And that's not the world we live in. People bring work home and homework. And sometimes people are working from home. And so these things come into play. And so the way I frame it is that in our conversations, that we want our conversations to be respectful. And, you know, for us, you know, we're not going to go deep into that, but that essentially every person is worthy of dignity and value. And that's one of the true values I learned from my mom. So how do I leave each conversation with that person feeling worthy and valued?
Yeah. And dignity and value, why do you feel like those are so important as pillars? You know, let's go a little bit deeper into that.
Yeah, those are important because everybody wants to feel valued, right? Especially in our communications and our conversations. Research after research shows that people actually want to have more conversations with people when they feel like they were actually heard. It's not always that you took my perspective, that you shifted the whole way you thought, but did you genuinely hear what I said? Did you deeply listen? And did you understand my thought process? And unfortunately, in today's society, in the world of distracted listening, we don't dive in deep. And so the understanding of feeling dignified, of feeling valued, of feeling worthy is simply by being acknowledged. And we could talk later about the framework to get there, but full acknowledgement can be a part of every single one of our challenging conversations.
Yeah. And you know, what's so funny about that is I feel like this is so basic, but it's basic, but it's so forgotten in the nuance of, you know, just being a human, not just being a human, being a good human. Because, you know, communication between two people, for me, again, seems so basic, but I know I'm not perfect and sometimes I forget. It's having eye contact. It's not
Yeah.
trying to do multiple things at once. It's not walking off when you're talking to me, right? Like these are
All
the
right.
little nonverbal cues that help me see like, oh, you are listening to me, you acknowledge me. And like you say, like, I feel dignified, right?
Yeah. I love what you said because, these are basic concepts. And what has made it hard, and this is the unique aspect, we talk about this a little bit in the book about a picture of our past, is how how were disagreements framed for you growing up? Like
Mm,
in your household, what did you see as disagreement? Right? Both good and bad, right? Because some people saw great examples and then some people didn't. And we take on those perspectives. And even in our early work, right? Because even our work was expanded by conversations with people that reflected and thought about what respect or even disagreement looked like in their early work careers and how it
yeah.
actually has impacted them as leaders, as executives, as HR, people managers. And that's been the interesting thing. So everyone listening and watching this, to think through one and first is that we are pictures of our past.
Mm.
And what did your past show you about disagreement? Was it loud? Was it boisterous? Were you told as a kid that children should be seen and not heard? Were you not allowed to disagree with your parents and or your early career manager? These are all things that have actually impacted us, whether good or bad, and ways that have shaped how we may disagree with others today.
Do you know what that makes me think about is like best practices and sort of retraining with your teams. Like if you're a people leader
Yeah,
out there listening right now, you're assuming that other people communicate and have the same role models as you have had
yeah,
previously. I have just recently accepted a new role when I'm not here on the podcast that is brilliant and fantastic. And it's an
yeah,
employee experience as well. And of course, these are people that get it. They love on loving people, right? And
yes.
one of the best things that they did that I was like totally, utterly impressed with is one of my first projects was a manual of me. And I was like, what's that? And they're like, no, we want you to actually tell us about you, your operating system, your communication styles, what you need when you focus, what you need, from your peers. And I think it's
I
just
love
taking
that.
that beat to just go, oh, so you have a different communication style than me. Oh, okay, good. I have an understanding of how to work well with you. And gosh, wouldn't you wish that every single corporation and every single company worked like that? And the truth is, no. You started a company, you're given 80,000 projects, onboarding's pretty
Yes.
much non-existent, and you're just told to go, right? And you don't
Yes.
get any of these like framework stuff. But what are your thoughts on that? Like just slowing down and asking people about their communication styles and role models in life.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. There's a couple of things that speak to that. One, I love that concept. I wrote it down like manual of me, right? That I do with my team here in Ghana. But there's other ways, right? Whether you do a manual of me, whether in your one-on-ones that you're actually having these deep conversations. So maybe it's not a manual up front.
Yes.
Maybe it's you're engaging these different types of conversations over the period of 5 meetings. Maybe it's simply by paying attention. One of the things that we do with our team, both here in Ghana, is that we have a monthly care call. And we just talk about how we're doing, right? And we talk and dive in deeper and we listen to hear people's perspectives and how they listen and learn. And so, as an observant leader, I'm able to pick up on things about how people work. One of our team members that needed to work with others when we pretty much are fully remote. And so we started figuring out ways that we shape that. Those are some of the things that as people leaders, you have an opportunity to identify and know your people so that you
Yeah.
can get the best and give your best to your people.
Yeah. And it builds that trust, that respect, that
Yes.
dignity. You're building a house one brick at a time. You're building that foundation so that when it comes time for a critical conversation where you and somebody else do not see to eye, you're built on a strong foundation from the jump, right?
Yeah, yeah, it's that relational capital we talk about all the time. It's how
Mhm.
have I invested, right? That's why I hate things like the sandwich model. Like, hey, you look great today. Oh, your project sucked, but the shirt's nice, right? Like that, it means nothing. If you've built up enough relational capital, they already know that you value them. They're not wondering, do you want the best for them? Do you have their back? they already are with you because you've already built them up. So when you have that critical conversation, when you have that challenging feedback, they already have some built-in trust with you. But not only that, and it's just the unique piece of it, is when we engage in these types of conversations and we have those levels of capital and trust, it makes it so much easier to share and have these disagreements. Think about having a disagreement with a good buddy, right? A good friend, a pal. You all know each other. You love each other, right? It's built in. You're not trying to fill in the gaps with negative conclusions because this person loves me. We just went to the game together. We just went to this concert. Rather than, I think they probably think I'm the most horrible person ever, and that allows us to do it. So I think it's brilliant.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying there, I mean, if we're going to put some corporate lingo to it, is you've built a psychological safety in that workplace, or in all of the things we're talking about applies back home as well. Have you built that psychological safety for me to say something that's kind of vulnerable and kind of goes against the grain of what we're talking about, but do it in a respectful way? So you talked about, you and I talked offline about the concept of golden respect. And I really love this. And I want you to define it for me as it relates to being a great listener and communicator. What is that?
Yes. Yeah. So golden respect, one of the things we had to do foundationally is we actually respectfully disagreed with the Queen of Soul herself, Aretha Franklin. And her song Respect, she said, we just need a little bit of it. And we're like, no, not just a little. We need a lot of it. But what we found is that we can't define respect the same way. Everybody defines it differently, right? And so where we took respect, how society normally sees it, and we transitioned that to what we call golden respect. And we're not going to go through all 10 characteristics, but I think 3 things that can be very helpful for people leaders. Number 1, that respect must be earned. That's societal view. Golden respect is that everyone has the choice to give respect. It's our choice. And that's the beauty of it. It's like, oh, look, where do we get this whole thing? That's what we love, what we call respect, the distant cousin of forgiveness. Because we finally found out that forgiveness is actually not about that other person.
Yeah.
It's about me and how I choose to give it. Number 2, that respect means that I honor you. And you hear people say things like, I lost a little bit of respect for you. No, you may have lost honor or appreciation, but when you always with that choice is that you can't lose respect because you've chosen to give it. It's stored inside of you. So it's not one of those things of honor. It just means you value that person's humanity. And last but not least is, I love this one, a person's title grants them respect because you are the people leader, because you are the CHRO, because you are. No. A person's humanity grants them respect. My mom taught me that it doesn't matter if it's a custodial staff member or the CEO of a company, that they deserve the same level of respect. And that's because they're a human being. And that's golden respect.
It's beautiful. And I just really hope that anyone that's listening to us right now kind of press pause and really think about that. Let that kind of digest deep down, because I think that my question for you on that is, a person who has been disrespectful to you, or, pushed a button where you feel really triggered, is it because of some insecurity on their part, or is there something internal on me that's happening, or a bit of both?
It's a combination. That's one of those gray spaces that you just don't know, right? That's why I love Oprah's book, What Happened to You, where she changes the narrative of what's wrong with you. In fact, things have impacted and shaped each and every single one of us. So you don't know if I mentioned something that could have been a triggering moment for you, or something happened in somebody's early career that impacted me, or some of my bias kicks in. So it's a mixture of it all. But what I can say is that's always our choice. I mean, that's why I was doing a session with one of the top companies in the US, and I had this lady said, Justin, I just can't respect anybody who appreciates or valued Hitler. Right. And, I'm not in the sessions to argue with her. I was like, ma'am, thank you first and foremost for sharing your perspective and being vulnerable, because she was Jewish and she shared her open and honesty. And I was like, but let's not start there. Let's not start at the number one ideological divide. That's something that we have a high, strongly connection to. But what if we started somewhere that was a little bit in middle or low in ideological conflict? And here's the point. The point of this is that when we think about things like this, I remember the book, Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Holocaust survivor, who talked about in each of those moments and all the challenging experiences he had, the horrific moments, he still had the power of choice. And we've taken that same persona with respect.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that there is something deep to what you were saying earlier about early role models. So can we circle back and talk about your mom a bit?
Yes.
How did she plant those seeds of humanity in you from early on, which I feel like has really rooted this deep wisdom in you? Tell me more about your mom.
Well, first of all, she made me go to events I didn't like to. And so thanks a lot, Mom. I wanted to go roller skating and she made me go. But my mom, as I as I later on in life, sometimes we think we're very wise. And, I started feeling high on myself, like, oh yeah, I have these great concepts. As I started doing deeper digging in myself, I was like, where did I get this from? And I realized it's my mom, Mary. You see, my mom, as I interviewed her, I asked her the story. She was one of the first Black female air traffic controllers in the Air Force. And sometimes she was stationed in Japan, and she said, Justin, I was there for 2 years at times, and there were some soldiers who were on base who had the opportunity to, but chose to never leave base. And she was like, Justin, I don't want you and your brother to ever be like that, to not leave your metaphorical home base and get to experience the beauty of people and cultures around you. And so how that played out in our life, we went to events that we didn't know a lot about. We went to Oktoberfest and Polish festivals and Hispanic Heritage Month events and to First Peoples powwows. We did all those things. And we brought exchange students into our home, all right? We had students from France and from Germany and from Japan and from Brazil. And what my mom was doing is that she would take us and go and have these experiences that we didn't know a lot about. But here's the kicker, Mary. We also went to events that we disagreed with. And what I would be sitting there like, Mom, why are we even here? And she's like, Justin, I want you to see the humanity in each person, even when you disagree with it. Now, how does that translate into the corporate world? Well, one of those practical strategies that's embodied in me, because years ago I realized I was confining myself to my circles of comfort. I was not leaving home base. And so I created this thing that we now call the Circles of Grace Challenge. And a Circles of Grace challenge is simply this. Every 6 to 12 months, I go to events, experiences, or I engage with people in either which I don't know a lot about and or I disagree with, asking 2 questions. 1, what did I learn about the event, experiences, and our people? And 2, what did I learn about myself as I experienced them? Now, you can do that individually, but guess what? You can do that corporately. We just took the Ford Family Foundation through it. And at the end of the 6 months, the debrief was so powerful because they focused on communities that they served and they leaned in. And it was so good to hear people say, I had the wrong perception. I thought this was wrong. Or even confirming like, yeah, I disagreed with that and I still do. But I've humanized them differently because I had that firsthand experience. That's what we as people leaders can create, not only individually, but even within our organizations.
Do you know what that makes me think of? And thank you for sharing that story. That clicked a new thing in my brain there is that, we're sharpening the saw of empathy deep down inside. It's how we can kind of zoom out of our little bubble of perception of that, everybody just sort of thinks and acts just like me, but zooming out and realizing, oh yeah, the petri dish is much bigger. And I can have greater perspective when I see the other side of the coin, right?
Yes, 100%. It sharpens our perspective. And I love the sharpen saw 7 habits. Shout out to Stephen Covey. In that, it opens our perspectives up to seeing it differently. And this is one of our pillars. We call it seek the gray. And when you seek the gray, you realize that the world is just more nuanced than you thought it was. And as we expand and grow and we enlarge our circles of grace, it allows us to hear from people differently, see people differently, actually give people the benefit of the doubt before we assume the most negative things. And I mean, that's one of the challenges in conversations is that when we hear somebody share something, we automatically, psychologically, we go to the most negative thought process of why they think that, what they probably believe, what this means, rather than filling in the gaps with curiosity.
Another action item I kind of think about for anyone that works in any sort of corporate America, medium to large size company, it's highly likely you have affinity groups or employee resource groups, ERGs for short. And these are groups that are, like the Asian American, Asian Pacific, the Hispanic, the LGBTQIA, like these groups where you may not be that person, but like to sit in and be an ally, to just listen, to gain better perspective of other people who work at your organization is a easy and perfect way to kind of put this into practice as well, right?
Oh, 100%, Mary. I mean, you're spot on. Working with a top company, a shoe company, and one of their senior HR leaders has shared a story with me as we're sitting down talking, and he had shared that one of the things that he did is that he said, "I realized I need to expand how I lean and learn, lean in and learn from the communities which are right in the company." And so he joined an employee resource group that had nothing to do with them. He had no desire to lead it. He had no desire to sponsor it. He was just going to learn, modeling the behavior. And after a year or two, he was leaning in so well that they actually elevated him to a place of an executive sponsor for them. And they were like, "You've spent time learning us, knowing us. We'd love for you to be our executive sponsor." And so he has no direct connection with this group outside of choosing to increase his proximity with it. Those are practical things that not only we can do as leaders, but that we can encourage those that we lead to do as well.
So you touched on it, the 5 pillars of respectfully disagreeing. And one of them you already mentioned, seek the gray. I would love for you to give us a quick overview of all 5 and maybe just 1 or 2 best practices. So if we could talk about the how, let's dive into that. How do we respectfully disagree?
Yeah, so pillar number 1 is challenge your perspective. And that was actually the last pillar added, but the most foundational. And the reason that is because most of the literature on conflict resolution and conversations starts when you have the conversation. Challenging your perspective starts before you even have any difficult conversation. And that's how are you putting yourself in environments of learning, growth, and understanding before these even occur, right? One of those we talked about is the Circles of Grace Challenge, but let me give leaders another one. We've been challenging this whole notion of the open door policy because most of our employees realize that the door is still closed, right? We even have virtual open door office hours, right? Tuesday through Thursday, I'll be on Teams from 3 to 5, right? And so, but we've said, what if you shifted to an out the door policy? Now that implies you're going out to hear the experience of the people. Now, one practical way to do that is a formula we've created called one meaningful connection per week, where you build into your calendar maybe 15 to 20 minutes each week to actually go and hear the stories that brought you to our company. How's your journey been? How's life going? Like all these different things we can do. And if you're like, that's too much because I'm really busy, then flip the W upside down and make it one meaningful connection per month.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a lunch. But those are practical ways you can build into your calendar that way. The second pillar is be the student. And when you're the student, we adopt the posture of learning and listening rather than lecturing. And one way that we do that is by asking more questions, asking to hear the stories of others, choosing to lean in with a conversation that may be more of a care call, where you're a student of something like joining ERG that has nothing to do with you. Pillar number 3 is cultivate your curiosity. And oftentimes what we do is we fill in the gaps with conclusions rather than curiosity. And it's because our brains work that way. Our brains want, if you've ever been on autopilot, went down an exit that you weren't supposed to go down. And that's what we do with people when we get second and third hand information. And so what if we practice a tool, a model we call the power of 3, where you dive in at least to the 3rd level of the conversation. And what I mean by that is you ask another question. Right? You ask another question. If you don't know what to ask, you use the power of 3 words of tell me more. Because when we cultivate our curiosity, it helps us to move from this place of potential bias and a better understanding, which leads to pillar number 4, seek the gray, and realizing that it's nuanced. When we go into our team meetings, conversations with, I want to find the C. And what I mean by that, and an amazing book called Dialogue, The Art of Thinking Together, he talks about we normally come with this conversation of A and B, and we're battling. You need to win A, and B needs to win A. But what if we create a C together? But C is not often 50-50. But it means that we're going to create something that we haven't created before. What if we started off our meeting every single meeting we had with, let's find C together. And last but not least is agree to respect. And agree to respect challenges this notion of let's just agree to disagree. Because we've all seen people do that very dismissively and very disrespectfully. But when we agree to respect, we say it's my choice, it's my opportunity to leave you fully acknowledged. Jean Zhao, Stanford professor, came up with a concept called thank you because. And so we wrap that in the 3FA framework that we can always fully acknowledge someone. We thank you because, you said some really challenging things today. And I want to say thank you so much for leaning in. It really helped me to have a better understanding.
Yeah.
Thank you because, wow, you said 3 things. And number 2, I need to dive in deeper. Or simply, thank you. This was a tough conversation you didn't have to have with me, and I appreciate it. Not once did I say, I agree with you. But at each of those moments, it gives me an opportunity to fully acknowledge you. Those are really practical ways that we can lean in to the 5 pillars.
Man, and seriously, you guys, don't feel any shame about circling back, reversing the last 3 minutes of the podcast episode and writing some of these tidbits down, because I really think that even just having that as a tidbit of like, tell me more is a powerful tool in my tool belt that I always pull out when I'm just trying to get more context, understanding, deepen that empathy to understand that other side of the point of view. But I think that that's great. Like, what you just said is you're not kind of placating to the person. You're not, patting them on the head in the South, how people boot people and they go, bless your heart.
Bless your heart.
There's nothing worse than getting something like that, in a nonverbal way of like, somebody's just booped you. Right. But actually somebody to say like, yeah, thank you. I've never heard it said that way before.
Yeah.
That is powerful and not pity and not a boop, if you will. So what are some of those other sound bites that people could say when, I'm saying something highly charged or emotional, or let's say we're talking about politics and I'm on the other side of the fence than you. Like, what can you say in response that says, hey, I heard you and I appreciate your insight?
Yeah, so it actually centers into an amazing body of research called conversational receptiveness. Now, what they found in this research, they found that these are 4 things, they call it the recipe, that help people to actually want to have more conversations with you, even when you disagree, that people feel like, this was a good conversation. Number 1 of those is that we acknowledge understanding, right? Like, I see your point there, or I better understand how you got there. Right? That acknowledgement of understanding allows us to form a wedge, or not a wedge, but form a pathway to bridge those divides. Number 2 is that we make positive statements like you just did right there. Yeah. Right? Like in those moments where they're like, okay, there's moments where I can see that they're with me. Or, man, I had a tough time or grew up with a hard family. Wow. Like, yeah. Wow. Those moments build those bridges. The 3rd piece of that is that we find these points of agreement, right? This place of common understanding. I once heard, and I love this analogy of like, if we're talking about things like gun rights or gun control, instead of starting off, why would you ever believe that? That's stupid. You know how this fact that, Mary, I really appreciate that even though we have different perspectives, that we really both care about the safety of our families.
Yeah.
That's the starting point, right? Rather than the other pieces. And the last but not least is we hedge our claims. So instead of speaking in absolutes, instead of saying, well, this always happens, or this, because people immediately defense walls, they try to figure out that one little thing that can disprove what you said. Maybe you say something like, from my experience, one of the things I found, or, sometimes I've seen this has happened, or oftentimes, but I noticed these a couple times it didn't happen. Those are moments where people are like, wow, you know what? It leads to critical thinking. Why is this important, especially in politics? Because I have a rule. And my rule is this, and people, you can adopt it if you choose to. I won't have conversations about people around politics unless one of 2 things have happened. Either 1, you can tell me what you like about the opposing party. And 2, you can tell me what you don't like about your own. Because that allows me we can hedge our claims. We can have more critical conversations. You could be a staunch, a Democrat or a staunch Republican or staunch whatever you are, but it allows us to have a deep and more meaningful conversation because I at least know you've thought about it hard.
And I imagine if you're having that kind of a framework, right up front with another person, they're also going to participate in that as well. And by, saying their points just the same. And what that does is that puts you on equal level playing ground, I guess, for the communication, builds that psychological safety for the container of that conversation. But then it also just opens the door for, that conversation to go in kind of vulnerable places. And I would imagine it would help both people feel safe. Because I think what happens when we have highly charged, totally emotional conversations is that one person jabs and they poke and they say something with the always and the nothing and sort of hit in places that, maybe we've lost respect, and are no longer having a professional kind of conversation at work. And then it shuts everything down, right?
Yes. Yeah, 100%. Like, I'll give you a great example because I love when people say this is about perfection. This is not about perfection, y'all. This is all about being the tortoise. The tortoise wasn't slow. And those who know the tortoise and the hare fable, the tortoise was strategic. We only called the tortoise slow because we compared it to the hare. And we saw what happened. The tortoise won the race. Now, how is this the tortoise approach? Because while writing, I respectfully disagree. I disrespectfully disagreed with someone, a fellow colleague, as he was writing and working on his book. And I think it centered around something about food, right? And I grew up, we didn't have a lot of money, right? So we ate food, we're on welfare, we had government cheese, all that spam and all that kind of stuff. And I remember, right, like we didn't have the liberty of throwing away food. And so when I saw him throw away food, I was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you throwing away food? He's like, I didn't like it. I was like, oh, so you throw away food you don't like? And then I went and attacked his parenthood. I was like, you let your kids throw away food? Right? And I immediately saw a defensive wall get up, and now we're going back and forth. And I realized my error is that I was operating, we call it the 3 self model. I was operating superior self. I'm better than you because I don't throw away my food, and you do. And I'm making many assumptions about you because I'm operating from superior self. Versus if I was operated not in an inferior self, which is the other one, but equal self. And here's one practical thing that people can do, right? It comes from the land of psychology. It's a powerful tool. It's called cognitive dissonance. I asked Justin, I said, what would equal self Justin do? Talking about myself in the third person, slightly move myself away from the emotion of that moment. Yeah. And I said, equal self Justin would have listened more. Equal self Justin would have heard the story. And so I went back and apologized and was like, hey, I'm sorry. I was operating from superior self. I made some big assumptions there, and I want to say sorry. And I started going back through the pillars. I became the student, and I began asking questions, and I saw the gray. And when it ended in a way that was more meaningful, that defensive walls were no longer up. And he even said, hey, I may have a different approach to the way I approach food and how I engage with my kids. And this is not about winning people to your side. But when we have these types of conversations, it imbues more vulnerability, as you said. And that's what we can do and create as leaders to model that behavior.
Be a good human, right? Yeah. This is like the core of being a good human is being a good communicator, and more so being a good listener. And I really just want to point out for the record, and this is really to tell myself when I go back and listen to this in a couple of years from now as well. When you take good care of yourself, you're getting enough sleep, you're exercising or moving your body, you're eating well, you have the ability to be your equal self. Your best self version is showing up to these conversations. Because I know that the Mary that doesn't get good sleep, that eats terribly and doesn't move her body, she's not showing up in a higher self way. Things will be triggering way faster. Things will poke at the buttons and make me say things that I regret later. And even more so because, I'm human and I'm not perfect. Avoids apologizing for things that I have done wrong and just want to brush under the rug. Be a good human, right? These are the things that we just deviate off of that are really like, it's always like, it's kind of meditation, bringing it back to center, and making good choices always, right?
Yeah. And it's practicing it, to your point. I love what you said in terms of being a good human. Society doesn't condition us to be good humans.
No.
Society conditioned us to be better than everybody else as a human, right? It's Carol Dweck's work on fixed and growth mindset, right? Which is really, really powerful. I want to be better than you. And so two things really stood out in what you said. Number one, we actually, in some of our other research around the employee experience, we encourage people to adopt our framework we call 5SC squared, and that stands for 5 self-care strategy challenges. And that's what's one thing you'll do daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually for your self-care, right? It doesn't have to be big things. And normally you start off with things where you already doing, and you might amplify it. If you go to the gym 5 times a week and you realize movement is important to you, then you might up it to 7, right? Or you may say, hey, I need to do something fit related every day. But it's identifying those things, because when you take care of yourself, we call it leading from the overflow. Is that when your cup, instead of pouring into other people, what if out of your overflow, you impacted many more people? Which leads to the second point, is I've had to do this and practice this even as a parent. I have disrespectfully disagreed with my kids. And I've sometimes used that I'm the parent and operate in superior self as a way to couch it. I know what's best for them. I know what's better, versus listening, hearing their perspective. And sometimes they've been right. And I've had to go back, and even when every fiber of me didn't, and apologize to them. And sometimes I tell the story in my presentations. I've had people come up and said, I've never heard my parent apologize to me.
Yeah.
And I'm about to get emotional. What does that teach our kids? That apology is being weak, that I can't be vulnerable and share. And they take these into the workplaces. And then we wonder why there's so much conflict. So not only what's happening as a people leader and leader at work, but what is happening at home and with those that you love, it matters.
If you're curious about the work that Justin does in the world, I highly recommend checking out his book. It's called I Respectfully Disagree: How to Have Difficult Conversations in a Divided World. You can find that online on Amazon or your favorite local bookshop around the world. Man, there's so much to this. I have to have you back later down the line on the podcast, because I would love to dive into other pieces of your work, because I think you're doing amazing work out in the world, Justin.
Thank you. And Mary, you are as well. So I am touched by the work that you do. So thank you for having genuine conversations. It's meaningful.
It's my pleasure. So as we wrap up, there's a few questions I like to ask everybody that comes on the podcast. And here we go, rapid fire. First off, what's one book or blog you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or challenging you and poking holes in your belief system?
Yes. A Long Walk to Freedom by Nelson Mandela. Powerful. I try to really study one person that's leaning into my place. And he's been an embodiment of both disrespectful disagreement as well as later on in life, respectful disagreement. And I've learned a lot.
Beautiful. Tell me, who is one person, somebody you know personally in your network that you just feel is up to brilliant things? We could shine a spotlight on them. And who knows, maybe we'll one day have them on the podcast. Who would that be?
Yeah, so Raven Solomon, she's doing a lot of work around future-ready inclusion and how organizations can get future-ready. And that part of this conversation around inclusion, generations, and all these pieces is that you have to be future-ready. And she's tied an innovative approach to the conversation. And so I think she's up to some brilliant stuff.
Awesome. And by the way, everybody, you listening in, you can find the show notes for this episode and everything that we talked about, links to the books, links to Raven, all of that over at thesimplifiers.com. Just look up and search for this episode and you'll find it all there. So I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
So I'm grateful for taking a paid nap. So what do I mean by that? So I taking my kids to the movies, and we're going to go see Inside Out 2. Heard it's really good. I love the first one. But when I go to movies, I fall asleep. And then I wake up, act like I knew the whole movie. So they're going to have a great time. I'm going to have a great time sleeping in the movie theater. But I'm grateful for that time with the kids and that they'll walk out really excited.
I love it. I love it. It's such a good movie. You're going to love it. I think you'll stay awake, actually. Thinking about what you are passionate about, you'll stay awake.
I might, or I'll watch it later at home when I when it's not the nighttime and I wake up at 3 a.m. But yes, I look forward to it.
So if you are looking for Justin to connect to him directly, you can go to all of his social media links, which again are in the show notes over thesimplifiers.com. But also you can find him on Instagram at I Work Meaningful. That's also his handle on LinkedIn. And so you can connect with him, see the content he's putting out in the world. And, more importantly, send him a DM, ask questions, tell him that you heard him on this podcast. I think him and his team would be so glad to hear from you. So
we would love to. And thank you for simplifying being a good human.
Yes. And thank you so much. I appreciate you saying that. My final question for you is this. Someone somewhere is listening to you and I right now, and they are thinking about a terrible conversation that they had last night or yesterday at work that just went off the rails, horribly wrong. They said all the wrong things and the other person said all the wrong things back as well. What's one thing you could whisper into their ear right now just to encourage them in this moment?
The fact that you feel it now lets me know that you're a good human. And so I want to encourage you to move from shame to simplification. And that simply moving towards a posture of apologizing or asking for another conversation, you're modeling great behavior. And the more and more you do that, the more and more you'll see that you'll have better conversations, because you can vehemently disagree with someone's ideology and yet still passionately pursue their humanity. You can do this.
Big love to you, Justin. Such great work. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mary.